Hello, I'm Emma Desi, and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers. If you're brand new here, welcome, and here's what you need to know. This is a community that believes you are never too old to write your first novel. No matter what you've been up to until now, if you're ready to write your book, I'm ready to help you reach the end. I focus on helping you find the time and confidence to begin your writing journey, as well as the craft and skills you need to finish the book. Each week I interview debut authors, editors and industry experts to keep you motivated, inspired and educated on all things writing, editing and publishing. If you want to catch up, head on over to emmadesi.com where you'll find a wealth of information and tools to help you get started. Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 top tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. An author, attorney and adjunct professor of law, L.M. Lilly founded Writing as a Second Career to share her information with people juggling writing novels with working at other jobs or careers. She has written and published multiple books on writing craft, including Super Simple Story Structure, A Quick Guide to Plotting and Writing Your Novel, and Creating Compelling Characters from the Inside Out. Writing as Lisa M. Lilly, she is the author of the Q.C. Davis Mysteries and the best-selling 4-book Awakening supernatural thriller series. She also hosts the podcast Buffy and the Art of Story. So let's delve into finding out more about the two series and Buffy and the Art of Story. Well, welcome, Lisa. I am so thrilled to have you on the show. Thank you very, very much for being here.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here.
Now, one of the things I often ask my guests is, what was your journey to fiction? So I'm curious how you made, because often for us it's a bit of a meandering route. And so I'm wondering what brought you to the world of fiction.
Yeah, there was definitely some zigzagging. I started writing when I was very little just because I loved to read. So I started writing stories and I scribbled out novels when I was in 6th grade. I had a friend, we would trade our novel chapters, but I didn't finish anything. And then in college is really when I focused on it more. I was struggling for a major, took a bunch of accounting classes, which have come in handy later. But when I looked at a major, I found this school that had a writing program. And at the time, I wasn't thinking career so much as, oh, they'll give me a degree for writing. Awesome. So I did that and I finished my first novel a year after I got out of college. I wrote a number of them. And this was back when there really were no options to put your work out there directly. So I kept trying to get agents and get publishers, and I was making progress in terms of getting more personal letters, getting letters saying, oh, this is so close, send me your next novel. And at some point, I decided to go to law school. I had been working as a paralegal and I really liked it. I liked what the attorneys seemed to be doing even better. And so I went to law school. I went at night. So I was pretty much working or in school or studying all the time. So I did not write fiction then. I wrote some poems. I wrote a bunch of poems. And then after that, I was always writing on the side. So I continued. I almost see it as I couldn't, I tried to stop. My first year as a lawyer, I thought it's enough. Just don't don't try to write a novel too. It's too much. And I really missed it. Mm-hmm. And I discovered I had actually written about 90 pages during that year, just here and there. So that's when I started deliberately making specific time to write, despite that I worked a lot of hours. And it took quite some time, but I had been practicing about 8 or 9 years when I self-published my first book. And then I have been writing and publishing novels ever since.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's I think for many creative people, even if I've never worked in the law, but I imagine it's very much based in fact. It's got to be very precise. There's rules to it all, and then having that option, even if it's just every now and again, to kind of break free from that and be creative and spill things down on the page or on, with paint if you're an artist. But there is something about being creative and using that bit of the brain that drives us. And as you say, we don't necessarily know why. It's just
I had people ask me, because my law practice involves a lot of writing. It's a kind of practice where a lot of things are decided on what we write and submit to the court. And people would ask me, well, how can you sit down, then go home? You work an 11-hour day and 6 days a week, go home and write. But the skills cross over a little, but it's a different kind of writing. And it felt very almost restoring and freeing to me. That I used to take what I called writing vacations, where I'd take a week off, I wouldn't go anywhere, and I would just write my novel. And it did not feel like work. It felt fun and creative in a different way. And you're right. Part of it is I do like to structure my stories. I think a lot about plot, but it is such a more free form, creative area than in a different way, a more relaxed to me kind of creativity than all the very specific rules and deadlines you have to follow in law.
Yeah. I can imagine it's a bit of a palate cleanser for your...
Yes.
Yeah,
very much so. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned overlap there, and indeed with your QC Davis mysteries, I think there is a bit of an overlap between the fiction and the legal world. I wonder if you'd tell us about that series and where you got the idea from.
That series, so you're right, the main character, although she is kind of an amateur sleuth. She solves crimes, but she also is a lawyer. She's a lawyer who used to be a child stage actress. So I drew a little from my life. I was never a child stage actress. I did a little bit of community theater, but that idea of balancing your work and having this creative side of you. And then for her now, it's fitting in her law practice and then investigating these crimes and how you juggle that. There isn't a ton about that, but there's a little. And I'm sure that I didn't think about it that way, but the more I write them, the more I realize that is I do draw from my life for that. I started that series in 2018. And that was at a point where I had really scaled back my law practice. So it's very, very part-time now. I don't run my own firm anymore. I work with someone else. And I feel like that opened up space for me to have a character who was a lawyer. Before that, people would say to me, why don't you write legal thrillers, or why don't you use your law practice? And my thought was, I'm spending 60 hours a week on this already. I don't want to sit down and write about a fictional lawyer. But once I was not as immersed, I enjoy drawing on that background, and it gives me a chance. It's a first person. So here and there, I do admit that my character Quill's commentary may resemble some of my thoughts about the profession. Mostly positive, but it's kind of fun to be able to play with that a little bit.
And so the mysteries that she solves, are they also based on kind of real life experience and things that you might have worked on as well?
They come, some of the ideas are sparked by that. None of them are directly from an experience I had. But for example, in the first book, the question is, Quill begins investigating because, and this happens in the first chapter, so no spoilers, this man she's been seeing, she's very close with him. It's been a very fast romance, and she finds him dead in the apartment they were going to move into. And the question is, the police think it's suicide, and she is not convinced, partly because she knew him, and his son doesn't believe that his father would ever do that. But also, as a side issue, he has this life insurance policy. And I happen to know from my practice, they don't pay out. Most of them have what's called a suicide clause, and they won't pay out if you commit suicide within X amount of years. And her boyfriend is someone who is former doctor working in the insurance industry. So she knows he knows that, and she knows he wouldn't have left his son. Basically, he would not have left his son with nothing. So it isn't a huge part of the story because no one wants to read about insurance. But it's a small factor in why she is so convinced that in addition to the personal aspect. And it's one of the things she uses to tell other people because they're like, well, you haven't known him that long. And of course, his son doesn't think he would do this. So it's partly her wedge to say, no, but look at this issue. Like he is not someone who would leave his son without any means to support himself.
Okay. So yes, you're able to use your existing knowledge and kind of throw it into the background of a story and help it move along nicely.
And I try to keep it very background, but it sparked the idea and then it went all kinds of other directions. But it was this little grain that got me thinking about, what if somebody died and there was this issue, which is it murder, suicide, and how do you convince people?
Now, I think there's 3 in the series. Is that right?
I just released the 4th in December. And they're all, it's the worried man, the charming man, the fractured man, and the troubled man. So that's the branding. And part of my idea for it, I love to read thrillers and mysteries, but I got tired of women are always the victims. Not always, but there are so many that focus on women as victims. And many of the thrillers, because you are seeing through the antagonist's point of view, you're seeing women being terrorized. And I got tired of that. And so I wanted to flip it. And my main character, obviously, she's a woman. It's first person. So we're not seeing from the villain's point of view, but also not always. But in my books, it is more often men than women who are the victims. And I try to make it more this I did learn from my law practice. Most victims of murder, if it is someone they know, and if it's a man killer, it's stranger violence, it's usually men against men. It's very overrepresented in the thriller genre, how often women get killed by strangers. Like usually it's someone personal. So all of my mysteries pretty much center on personal stories, personal, it's somebody they knew.
Okay. That's interesting. I didn't know that about the being killed by a stranger that is usually male to male. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's sad, but the biggest danger to women statistically is the men they live with or are close to, are close family with, or are involved with. And and I feel like as much as I love thrillers, it started to bother me that this message was, you've got to be so careful what you do and where you go, which of course we all are. But it just seemed so outsized. And I got tired of reading it. So I thought, I'm going to write what I want to write, what I want to read.
It's great that you're addressing the balance there, because I think I've heard that sort of commentary from a number of particularly women thriller writers, crime writers who, as you say, kind of fed up seeing it's always women who are the victim of some horrible crime. So it's nice to see the balance being redressed a bit and that it happens worldwide to everybody.
Yeah.
Although that's a good thing, but you know what I mean.
Right. Not that we want more men to be, victims.
So we were talking before we started recording, we were sort of talking a little bit about the marketing of books, because we'll come on in a second to talk about your other series, which is fits firmly within the thriller genre. But we were talking about your QC Davis mysteries and where they fit, because this is something that affects all of us writers, whether we're published yet or to be published. We need to figure out where we fit. And so I was asking you about this series, is it a cozy mystery? But you were explaining to me the nuances between cozy and where the Davis mysteries fit. I wonder if you could kind of share that with our listeners.
Yes, when I started marketing them, I really went too broad because, and I think we're all, as authors, we want to say, oh, everyone will love my book. And I wasn't that broad, but I mysteries and thrillers. So I just want to draw in all mystery and thriller writers. And gradually through reviews, I discovered a lot of people who like cozy mysteries really like the series. I had someone on Twitter tweet me and say, oh, my mom loved your QC Davis mysteries. They're a little darker than the cozies she usually reads, but she's so happy that there's no graphic sex and little swearing and no on-screen violence. And those are the things that make something a cozy. But as I was telling you, usually in a cozy, people are also looking for something a little more kind of cute and lighthearted. There's a cat solving the mystery, or it's a knitting circle, or something like that. And the books don't have that. So it took me about 3 books before I honed in on the categories, particularly on Amazon, but also I want to say Kobo as well. They have amateur sleuth categories. In fact, a reader suggested that to me. She said, I think your books would fit in amateur sleuth, traditional detective. So people who like the sort of British detective mysteries or the Sherlock Holmes. Mine are a little more character driven, but those people tend to really love it. It's really enjoy the characters, follow the clues, unravel the mystery. And as a result, with my 4th book, I got a review from Windy City Reviews, and it's the best review I've ever gotten in my life. Like, I was so thrilled. The reviewer actually mentioned Louise Penny, who I love, in the review as another author whose book she loved, and Joe Nesbo. And I thought, yeah, I found my target reader. She's someone who loves detective novels, who loves the unraveling the clues, and it was clear I had found the target reader. So it only took me 3 years and 4 books to narrow it down. Not that I wasn't reaching any readers before that, but I kept sort of looking through those reviews and seeing, oh, if someone doesn't like it, what else did they read? And if they do love it, what else do they read? And what words do they use to describe it?
But I think that's a fantastic example of how it's an ever-evolving thing being a writer. We don't get it all, especially as indies. We don't get it. We don't understand every facet of the publishing world straight away. It takes us a bit of time to find what we love to write, where our readers are, how to express what the kind of book is and the story is, and even those other things like writing the correct blurb so that it engages our reader, and then the cover, of course. All these things are trial and error, and so I think that's a really great sort of message for everybody, that you're doing very, very well, but it's again, it's trial and error and finding the way forward. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. That's great.
I'm glad you mentioned, I'm sorry, but I was going to say, I'm glad you mentioned the blurbs because, at first I was writing them more like thriller blurbs. And I used a book description service for the first book and I went to look back and looked at the language that they used that improved it. And it included language that went more toward the detective, follow the clues, unravel the lies. And I thought, oh, clever amateur sleuth. And I thought, oh, okay. Yeah. If you're presenting your book as a thriller, people expect a thriller. So it is good to always kind of look back. If your sales are not where you hoped or your reviews are not what you hoped, see if you can figure out maybe your blurb just needs to be tweaked a little.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still doing that myself. I'm still figuring it all out.
I don't think it's ever finished.
So let's move on to your other series, which does fit very clearly within the supernatural thriller. So tell us a bit more about that series as well.
Yeah, that one, I used to read a ton of horror, and not slasher or gory, but the kind of what I think of as quiet horror. And I was a huge fan of the book Rosemary's Baby, which now is quite old, but a classic. And then do you remember the book The Da Vinci Code? There was such a huge interest in that. And whenever I talk to women about it, they would say part of what fascinated them was this alternate view of the Christian religion, of how in the books the feminine side of God had been sort of removed. So part of that background plot line is that there was this femininity here. And I started thinking about what would happen if you brought those things together, the Rosemary's Baby idea and this idea of the divine feminine. So by the Awakening series started as kind of a cross between Rosemary's Baby and the Da Vinci Code. And you have this young woman who's in college and she discovers she's pregnant and she has never had sex, not for religious reasons, for very practical ones. And there is this like religious cult of these powerful men who think, oh, this is going to change the world. This is going to trigger the apocalypse. And then you have all these people telling her what it means. And it focuses on her discovering, what does this mean? What is her role? Is her child about saving the world, destroying the world, evil, good? It really explores all those things. But in the context of this one is definitely a thriller, very fast paced. And I had so much fun with it. And it also was such a compelling idea to me. Essentially, I thought, what would happen if a young woman today found herself pregnant, couldn't explain it? What would her boyfriend say? What would her family say? And then what happens when all these other forces come in to convince that it means one thing or another? She's evil. She's amazing. She's going to save the world. It's the end of the world.
Interesting premise there. And I love that you've done what Stephen King, another horror writer, says. He always says, doesn't he, when he's coming up with his ideas, it's what if I put this with that? What would happen if? And so you've kind of amalgamated these two to come up with this amazing series. Sounds quite what's the word I'm looking for? Big in scope, kind of
Yes.
Not just one man trying to survive, but actually kind of a global, what could be a global impact with the...
Yeah, very like, fate of the world kind of, which is probably why it ended up taking 4 books to finish the story. And sometimes readers will ask me, will I write any more? But it really, maybe at some point it'll occur to me something else I could do with it. But I felt like it really was this story arc. And at some point I think you have to resolve that and not just kind of keep stringing it along.
So two kind of mystery genres there, 2 different series, but very different kind of feels to them. Is there an overlap in terms of how you approach, because you mentioned there that you plot, is there a difference in what's expected in terms of how you plot the story? Is there so in a thriller in a cozy mystery or an amateur sleuth, like in a thriller, do you have that inciting incident really close up front, and it's very dramatic and it's set kind of like, do you need the body up front for that one as well? Or are there where are the overlaps of the two and where do they differ, I guess is my question.
Yes, there are definitely overlaps. And you're right, the inciting incident, and this is partly my own, I used to joke, if somebody doesn't die on page 1, I don't want to read the book. Because when I was in law school and as a lawyer, I had to plow through so much. There's so much difficult reading involved. So when I want to read for fun, I want it to grab me immediately. I don't literally put a dead body on page 1, but yes, in both of those, I think you need your inciting incident very early, because that, or at least something that tells the reader that it's coming. And that is a much faster start than a lot of books. And there's also overlap. I generally use the same plot structure to start with, where I look at how it starts. I look at the major plot turns. I try to do a really strong midpoint of the story. The differences are more in pacing. So a thriller must move much quicker. You have much bigger, more dramatic things happening almost at the end of every chapter. in any book, it's good to have a hook at the end of every chapter, but they're kind of much bigger. So in the Awakening series, as you said, it's almost a global story. So there's more in the way of explosions and secret meetings, and somebody disappears, and someone gets kidnapped, and there's much more of that. Where in the QC Davis mysteries, it's a little bit more step by step. You still have these major turns at the same places, but in between, one reviewer described it as, Quill peeling back delicate layers to find the truth, which, is not in the Awakening series. That is not going to work. We need a car chase here and there. But also similar in that I feel like both, I really go into the characters. They're still very character based, but the thriller series much quicker, and nothing supernatural in the QC mysteries.
No. Okay. Interesting. So I'm going to change tack just a little bit, because I know that as well as writing your own fiction, you help others do the same. And one of the ways you do that is with your podcast. You have a podcast called Buffy and the Art of Story. So I'm taking it you're a big Buffy fan, and that's where the idea came from.
Yes, I am a huge Buffy fan. I watched it when it came out, and then I was thrilled when this is old technology now, but when DVDs became available. And that's the first time I truly saw how the show told this season-long story arc, which was more like a novel. And that was very new at that point. It may have been the first show that did that. TV used to be much more episodic. So I found it so much more interesting. And I have probably watched the whole series through at least a dozen times. There's always something new in it. And I learned so much about writing from it. So end of 2019, I was thinking about, I really wanted to do a podcast. And I listened to a lot of writing podcasts like yours, a number of other ones, they're Creative Pen. And I thought, what do I have to add to this? There's so many voices out there. And I thought, I love Buffy, and I can use that. So what I do is watch every episode of Buffy and break it down from a story perspective, looking at the major plot points, how the characters develop, the themes and how those are conveyed. Does it work? Does it not? The pace, both on an individual basis. And then I do a little spoiler foreshadowing section in case there's anyone out there who hasn't seen all of it, and talk about how does this episode relate to the bigger story arc of the season or the series.
You'll be horrified to hear that I've never watched Buffy. It kind of bypassed me a bit. So maybe this is my opportunity to go back and watch them and have the study notes with your podcast as my study notes beside it, and watch how they crafted these stories. So
and see, and you won't have to worry about spoilers.
So not only do you have the podcast, but you also have a website called Writing as a Second Career. So what prompted you to develop that particular side of your writing life as well?
I went to a few in-person indie author conferences when independent or self-publishing was somewhat new. And I attended some video conferences, and they were extremely helpful. And at the same time, as someone who had been in the legal field and a professional for most of my life, even before that, when I was a paralegal, I went to work, I had to wear a suit. For me, I had to kind of get past that this was a different world. Because to me, when you go to a conference, everyone should be dressed well and look professional in what in my mind was professional. So I had to kind of work past, I'm watching this video with this guy in a t-shirt that's kind of pulled out of shape, and it looks like he's sitting in his parents' basement. And my initial reaction was, which shows how we judge people, but certainly in court and stuff, that is how people end up being judged. And I'd think, well, what can this person have to tell me? And then I'd take a breath and listen, and I learned so much. So some of my thought was, one, to create something for people who maybe they're coming to this space and they want to talk to or hear from someone who is managing another career or another job. Also, particularly, that's sort of the optics of it, but the time issue. You and I were talking about making time to write. And if you're going to publish your own work, or even if someone else publishes it, time to market. How do you juggle all that? How do you fit all that in? Because most writers, even some of the ones you see on the bookshelves all the time, are still working at some other job, or maybe they're caring for children and they have to fit in their writing here and there, which is essentially, for years, I would write in 15-minute bursts, or I'm sitting at court and I'm scribbling in my notebook while I wait for my case to be called. So I wanted to address that. And it seemed to me there was so much out there that wasn't really hitting that market. So I still get calls from other lawyers or referrals from friends of friends saying, oh, I have this friend who's a lawyer or an accountant or an insurance adjuster, and they're writing a book and they want to talk to someone of how do you manage this? So that's a very long answer, but that was the inspiration for it.
Well, it's a good question because, you still, although you said it's part-time, you still practice and teach law. You're doing your own writing, you're doing the podcast, you're doing the website and coaching. How do you fit it all in? Lisa, how do you?
It's definitely tricky. I do a lot of each week. I try to sit down and I look ahead and schedule my time, and I try to keep certain hours, like Monday through Friday. I try to make at least 3 hours each morning writing. So whether it's writing fiction or writing a nonfiction book, those are my writing hours. So the week before, I'll figure out, okay, what am I working on that week? And then I'll have certain hours that are marketing. The podcast takes a lot of time. So I know there are certain big chunks that I have to fit in. And then I'll have what are the smaller things to do to fit in between. And then I also, which I think is more key, I do for the year what I think I would like, what I would like to accomplish, my goals. And then every couple months, I sit down and say, okay, for the next 2 months, how am I going to make progress on this? Is it, I'm going to get a first draft of the novel done. I'm going to release X amount of podcast episodes. Usually I don't get everything done. So it's very aspirational, but it really helps keep me on track. And I try to really stick with that, because otherwise I have found, I look back and I've been very, very busy, but I can't always, it's sometimes hard to see what I've accomplished. Usually I have accomplished things, but maybe it's not the ones that were the most important.
Yeah.
So I feel like the priority is the big thing. What is the main thing I want to do that particular month or that particular week?
Yeah. I love that you've said that, because being busy and being productive are two very different things. I have to catch myself as well. And I go, Emma, just being busy. Yes.
Oh yeah. It took me a long time, partly because in my legal career, most of my work, the deadlines are imposed from outside. So it tells me what the priorities are. That isn't really my choice. And then I generally get paid by the hour. So as long as I am making progress, being busy generally is being productive, because I'm getting those things done and going forward, and I know what I have to do. And yeah, it took a long time to make that connection of, oh, just because I worked 8 hours today, I may have spent a lot of it on things that, sure, they're sort of helpful, but not the ones that really matter. Yeah. So I think that is a huge thing, especially when you have limited time. If you have half an hour, where is that going to do the most for you? And then what do you enjoy? That's important as well, obviously.
Yeah, it's got to be fun. We mustn't forget about that. Now, you mentioned just before your nonfiction books, which I haven't yet asked you about. So could you tell our listeners a little bit about those as well?
I started the first one, super simple story structure. Initially, I was writing it as a free download for the website for people to join my email list, but it ended up being a book. So now what you can get is the worksheets that go with it free. And it's a relatively short book, but it's aimed at that sort of in between plotting and winging it, or discovery writing or pantsing. So it's a very loose structure where you pick out the inciting incident, the major plot points. And then if you're someone who likes to wing it, you might just write from there, but you at least know where you're going.
Mhm.
It especially focuses on the middle of the book, where a lot of writers struggle, how to make that very strong. And if you're more of an outliner, I usually will do a little bit of outlining in between each of those plot points, but you don't have to. So it's a nice in between. And I found that it really resonated with people. We were talking about marketing on the fiction side. You're doing all this to try to get people to see your book. In the beginning, I didn't do anything to market it. I just put it up there, and people started buying it and commenting on it and emailing me. So then I expanded. I did one of the books is very much timing. It's called The 1 Year Novelist. So it is, how do you fit that in if you want to write a novel in a year? You can expand it or contract it, but it's almost a schedule that walks you through and kind of encourages you to do that. And then I have one on character. I have a book for 6th through 8th graders that's essentially how to write a novel following that same structure, but on a more examples that are more relevant for that age group. Because I always use examples of movies or books so that you can see how these things work. So that's the core of it. And my next book I'm hoping to do will be a more overall book on writer's block and getting yourself writing and keeping yourself writing.
Ah, well, that leads me nicely into my next question, which is, what are you working on at the moment? Are you doing both fiction and nonfiction, or concentrating on the nonfiction at the moment?
I usually alternate. So I'll finish a draft of a novel, and then I'll let it sit and work on a nonfiction book. And then I'll come back, revise. So I'll go between them so that each one gets some time to sit. So right now I am just finishing a novella in the QC Davis Mystery Series, which will be for my email list subscribers. I wanted to do something really of substance for them. And then, yes, I plan to work on that writer's block book. And I also do the Buffy and the Art of Story podcast. You can read, I've compiled that into books as well. So there's one available for season 1. There's one for the first half of season 2, because it's much longer. And so that will be the next project, is getting that second half of season 2 out there.
What a great idea. Yeah, so that people can go back and study it and kind of sort of digest it at their leisure. That's a great idea.
Yeah,
well,
and some people are podcast listeners. Oh, sorry.
You are a busy lady, yeah. So tell me, where can listeners find out more about you online?
Yes, they can, for my fiction, can go to lisalilly.com. So that's LISALILLY.com. And if you go to that /free, the first in each of my series is free, both the supernatural, thriller, and mystery. For writers looking for resources, writing as a second career.com. There's books on writing there. There's lots of articles about writing, publishing, marketing, and some free downloads. And then for the podcast, you can find that at lisalilly.com/Buffy story.
Fantastic. Wow, brilliant. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed speaking to you.
Oh, it's been wonderful. Thank you for having me on. And it was really terrific.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers, hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.